There was no election, no crown waiting to be placed on anyone's head, no vote, no ballot, no show of hands. Just a handful of people standing around a fire try to figure out who everyone should listen to. Somehow, out of that silence, someone always became the one others followed. The system they used to decide that was brutal, elegant, and older than history itself. It had no name, no paperwork, and no permanent throne. And here's the strange part. You still use that exact same system almost every single day. Rewind 200,000 years to the first groups of Homo sapiens moving across the grasslands of Africa. These bands were small, usually fewer than 50 people, tied together by blood and survival. There was no government here, no law code, no institution of any kind. Just people, fire, and the constant, pressing question of who decides what happens next. Someone had to decide where to hunt, when to move camp, how to divide the meat. And whoever answered that question well, again and again, started to matter more than the others. That's not a vote. That's not a crown. That is the raw beginning of leadership itself. But here's what almost nobody expects. In these earliest societies, there was often no permanent leader at all. Leadership wasn't title. It was a role that moved from hand to hand, depending on the moment. The best tracker led the hunt because he could actually read the ground. The calmest, fairest person settled the arguments because everyone trusted his judgment. To understand why humans do this, scientists first looked at our closest living relatives. Among chimpanzees, leadership is simple. The strongest, most aggressive male usually just takes it by force. Early humans discovered something remarkable. Several ordinary people, working together, could always overpower one strong bully. The group could always outmatch the strongest individual. And that single fact reshaped human power forever. So instead of one dominant male ruling by muscle, human groups learned to rule themselves collectively. That collective instinct is still buried somewhere inside every single one of us today. So when we ask how ancient humans chose their leaders, we're really asking how humans learned to resist being ruled at all. Skill decided a lot of it, and skill was almost impossible to fake in front of the whole group. So did generosity. The hunter who shared his kill fairly earned trust that a hoarder never could. In a world without money, without writing, without institutions, trust was the only currency that mattered. Charisma helped too, the simple ability to make people feel calmer, braver, or more certain. But charisma without results didn't last long out here, because bad decisions got people killed. If a leader's choices led to hunger or death, the group simply stopped listening to him. There was no ceremony to strip him of power. People just quietly turned towards someone else. It was leadership by proof, evaluated fresh, every single day, with no room for old reputation. A teenager who found water during a drought could outrank a grown man who had failed twice before. Age didn't matter nearly as much as people assume. Results did. But every so often, someone tried to turn temporary influence into permanent control. He'd start claiming a bigger share of meat or ordering people around outside his area of skill. And the group had a very old, very effective way of dealing with that. Ridicule. Mockery. Jokes told loudly enough for him to hear every word. Anthropologists call this a reverse dominance hierarchy, and humiliation was one of its sharpest tools. If mockery didn't work, the group simply stopped cooperating with him, sharing food, or including him at all. Isolation in a small hunting band wasn't just embarrassing. It could be a death sentence. In the most extreme, well-documented cases, groups went even further than exile. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm studied dozens of hunter-gatherer societies and found the same pattern worldwide. From the Kalahari Desert to the Arctic tundra, would-be tyrants were mocked, shunned, or in rare cases, quietly removed by consensus. The message was always the same. No one person gets to own the group. For most of human history, equality wasn't a value people talked about. It was a rule people enforced, sometimes violently. There's a Rayal custom, still recorded among hunter-gatherer peoples today, that shows exactly how this worked. Among the San people of the Kalahari, hunters would openly insult a successful hunter's kill on purpose. One elder explained it plainly. When a young man's heart is too full of pride, he thinks of himself as a chief. So they insulted his meat on purpose, to keep his heart humble and gentle instead. Anthropologists later gave this custom a name, insulting the meat. It sounds harsh, but it was actually an act of care aimed at protecting the whole group from arrogance. A great hunter, they believed, should feel like an ordinary person, not a king. That single idea, that no one should tower over the rest, quietly held human societies together for 200,000 years. Not every kind of authority needed a spear or a kill to back it up. The oldest members of the band carried something the young hunters didn't: memory. They remembered which valley flooded, which berries were poisoned, which pass had failed travelers before. In a world with no books, a long memory was worth more than raw strength. When a storm was building or a river was rising, people listened to the ones who had seen it happen before. That single sentence could save the entire group's life. And when it did, the elders' authority didn't come from force. It came from being right. Wisdom, in this world, wasn't a virtue. It was a survival tool with a face and a name. Elders also carried the group's stories, the ones explaining who they were and where they came from. Storytelling wasn't entertainment alone. It taught the next generation how to survive without repeating every mistake firsthand. Then there was a different kind of authority entirely, one that didn't come from hunting or memory at all. The shaman claimed to speak with a world beyond the visible one, spirits, ancestors, the forces behind the weather. He healed the sick, interpreted dreams, and decided which omens meant danger and which meant safety. Nobody could prove any of it. And that was exactly the point. Unverifiable knowledge is very hard to argue with and very easy to fear. If the shaman said a place was cursed, people simply didn't go there, no matter how good the hunting looked. This was a different formula for power entirely. Not fear of a spear, but fear of the unknown. In many bands, the shaman and the best hunter ruled side by side, one commanding the body, the other the mind. It was an uneasy partnership, but it worked because neither man could fully replace the other. And long after the hunt was forgotten, the symbols the shaman left behind on cave walls survived for tens of thousands of years. But long before farming ever existed, archaeology found something that breaks the simple story a little. In places like Sungur in modern Russia, some burials from 30,000 years ago are covered in thousands of carved beads. Someone in that hunting band mattered enough, even before farming, to be sent off with extraordinary wealth. Maybe he was a great hunter, maybe a powerful shaman. We genuinely don't know for certain. But it proves that even in the age of equality, inequality occasionally slipped through the cracks. Those cases stayed rare exceptions for tens of thousands of years, not the rule. For most of the Stone Age, the fire circle, not the burial mound, was the real center of power. Then, around 10,000 years before our time, something happened that broke this entire system. Humans began farming, planting grain instead of following it across the land. That single change, the surplus, quietly broke the old rules of leadership forever. Because now, someone could control the grain instead of just the moment. And whoever controlled the food didn't need to win a hunt or red a flood to stay in charge. He just needed to control who got fed and who didn't. The first time, power could outlive a single good decision or a single bad season. Villages grew larger, some holding hundreds of people who weren't even related to each other. A system built for 50 related people simply could not manage 500 strangers. Someone had to settle land disputes, organize irrigation, and store surplus fairly or unfairly. So a new kind of leader emerged, one whose power came from position, not just performance. This leadership didn't rotate with the seasons anymore. It started to stick, and once it stuck to one person, it started to pass, quietly, to his children. For the first time in human history, you could be born into leadership instead of earning it. Archaeologists call these early figures chiefs, and their tombs tell us everything about how far this had come. Ordinary graves held a body and maybe a tool. Chiefs' graves held jewelry, weapons, and far greater wealth. In archaeology, the richer the grave, the greater the inequality the society had already built. Chiefs organized labor for walls, canals, and monuments no single family could ever build alone. By around 5,500 years before our time, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, these chiefdoms hardened into something new: cities, temples, and for the first time in the story of our species, kings. A king no longer had to prove himself around a fire every single night. He had soldiers to enforce his word, priests to bless his rule, and walls to keep the argument outside. In the span of a few thousand years, leadership went from something you earned every day to something you were simply born owning. And yet, underneath the walls, the temples, and the titles, ordinary people still lived in small, trusted circles. Neighborhoods, guilds, and households still quietly chose their own informal leaders the old way: skill and trust, not bloodline. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That ancient pattern never actually left. Every time a group forms with no official leader, the exact same ancient test quietly restarts. Watch closely, and you'll notice the person others quietly defer to is rarely the loudest one in the room. It's usually the one who stays calm, keeps their word, and turns out to be right more often than wrong. Confidence alone convinces no one for long. Competence, proven repeatedly, is what actually earns trust. Being loud and being trusted have never been the same thing, not around a fire, and not now. In the moment a leader hoards credit or resources unfairly, people still do exactly what ancient bands did. They quietly withdraw their cooperation, their attention, and eventually their loyalty. We don't call it a reverse dominance hierarchy anymore. We just call it losing the room. The tools change completely. titles, contracts, elections, hierarchies stacked on top of hierarchies. But underneath every one of those tools, the same 200,000-year-old instinct is still running. We are still quietly, endlessly, deciding who deserves to be listened to. Even in something as small as two people deciding who carries the heavier load, this ancient test is running. Nobody teaches us this system. We simply carry it because the ones who didn't survive. The bands that trusted the right people at the right moment made it through droughts, migrations, and winters. The bands that kept following the loudest voice instead of the most reliable one, often didn't. This wasn't just culture. It was a survival filter quietly running for thousands of generations. And every one of us alive today is descended from the bands that got this exact judgment right again and again. That's not a comforting thought. It's a fact stitched into the instincts we still act on without noticing. So the next time you find yourself quietly trusting one person's judgment over another's, ask yourself why. The honest answer is almost always older than you think. Skill, wisdom, mystery, and inherited wealth for different roads to the same old destination. Every human society, ancient or modern, has simply mixed those four ingredients in different proportions. There was never a moment in history when humans stopped asking that question. Every generation just answers it a little differently, with fire circles, with grain stores, with crowns, with elections. The method kept changing. The question underneath it never did. Who do we trust enough to hand them a little bit of power over the rest of us? That question shaped every band, every village, every kingdom, and every nation that ever followed. 200,000 years later, that is still the only vote that has ever really mattered. And it's the one question every single one of us is still quietly answering around every fire we ever gather at.